Welcome to In Session by Westside Children's Therapy, the podcast about the real work of pediatric therapy and the tools that help kids find their voice. Whether you're a parent, caregiver, therapist, this is the space where real conversations happen. Each week we sit in session with experts in the field to talk about the work, the wins, the challenges, and the science behind helping kids meet their full potential. I'm your host, Marika Kackett, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. We're in session. Welcome to this episode of In Session, Little Hearts, Big Minds edition. We're here to discuss pediatric therapy for the littles, kids basically 2 to 3 all the way up to that pre-tween era. With me is McKenna and Kevin from Westside Children's Therapy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
So I think the first question is, why bring a little kiddo to therapy?
Great question. I think there's so many reasons why we work with young children, and so many different presenting concerns and things that come into play that we treat, whether that be anxiety, traumatic early life experiences that can play into a lot of different ways, and depression, certainly one of them, those general mood concerns, emotion regulation, self-esteem. It's really all across the board. But I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that you have to have a mental illness, so to speak, in order to come to therapy, and that's not the case. We see a lot of kids for different reasons and different ranges, so to speak, of concerns.
How do you get a little kid to open up, to feel comfortable with you?
Yeah. I think one of the fast track ways, as it were, is kids are complicated and they need to develop that strong therapeutic relationship and alliance with their counselor. And one of the ways we do that is with play-based interventions or art-based interventions. So we incorporate a lot of different type of gameplay or art to really help that child feel at ease. Play is a child's world at the end of the day. So we, to welcome ourselves into their world, we do that through the use of play-based interventions and those art-based interventions. And that really kind of helps the kiddos. The littles aren't going to typically ascribe to the traditional counseling, as it were, where they sit on a couch and talk for the entire time. They do best when they're engaged and moving, and things will naturally just kind of come out as we work with them through those interventions.
How does it work with a child that maybe is nonverbal or very, very young children who can't clearly articulate, I'm sad, I'm hurt, something happened?
It's definitely a lot of modeling, a lot of support, and a lot of narrating as they're playing, as we're working together. It also incorporates that caregiver support too, to help the caregivers understand how we can best support them. And so with a lot of those kids who can't necessarily communicate verbally with words, we do a lot of different art techniques or play-based techniques like Kevin had mentioned. And that really helps to explore a lot of their inner world and how they respond. And we model that. We use words like, oh, that I can imagine that made you feel very sad, or I'm sure that is very confusing for you. And really teaching them the tools as we go to help them better communicate that and better understand what they're going through in their inner world.
And you kind of mentioned the caregiver. So how involved is a parent or a caregiver in the therapy session?
We try to keep our caregivers or parents actively engaged and involved. And we do that through a couple methods. So what we typically offer is what we call a check-in and a check-out. The check-in is the first approximately up to 5 minutes, and we get a high-level kind of overview of how the week has gone, how has the child been doing as it pertains to their treatment goals, what's been going well. We typically come from that strengths-based approach, so we just don't want to necessarily hear about like, oh, here's the struggles they've had, but we really want to highlight what's been going well. And that checkout process is a way to incorporate the caregiver and parent to let them know kind of a high-level overview of what we did in therapy that day. The other way that we really try to champion and connect with parents is through our caregiver or parent support sessions. Those are supplemental to the individual counseling that the child receives. And those are the opportunities to really help provide psychoeducation and guidance to the parents to support them on their journey, one, of being a parent, but two, to really help support them in the needs and the goals of the social, emotional, and mental well-being of their child.
So how can you support a parent or advise a parent who maybe is thinking, maybe my kid does need to talk to someone other than those of us in that little nuclear family? So how can you help guide and support a parent towards family counseling or towards counseling in general?
I think really empathizing with them and validating their experiences. They're doing the absolute best that they can with the information and the resources that they have. And sometimes it is helpful to have someone else come in and really just validate those experiences and let them know and, empower them to continue to support their children in the best way that they possibly can. And so I think it's reminding families that, coming to counseling isn't a bad thing. It's not something, we're not coming necessarily because something is wrong. We're here to help enhance, the child's strengths that are already there and the family strengths that are already there. And so really supporting families.
Because I can imagine, parents might feel guilt or even shame. Mm-hmm. So how can you help them kind of get beyond that?
And that's where we normalize, I think, the counseling and therapeutic process, that it isn't just limited to significant or severe mental health or mental illness concerns. We serve a variety of roles by namely providing a safe and therapeutic environment for their child to engage and process what it is, whether that's a life transition, social issues, or even those anxiety-based disorders, mood-based disorders, or traumas. Really what we're doing is we have the unique perspective and position of being outside of that nucleus, that family system, where we can provide a different level of insight and support to the parent as well as that child.
And when you have a situation, so if a parent, sometimes when you're in the bubble, you don't realize what's going on. And for littles, we're not talking about a teen that can, get in an argument and be like, ugh, and, be very, very teeny. But when you're talking about like littles, 4, 5, 6-year-olds, what are some of the signs that they might be exhibiting that a parent would say, maybe my kid needs counseling, maybe my kid does need to talk to someone?
I think typically speaking, we look at, and that's a good question to answer and a very broad question to answer too, because I think, again, you don't necessarily have to have a specific, mental illness or diagnosis in order to come receive therapeutic services. But we also want to look at, the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of some of the concerns that are present. Every child is going to get angry, just as every human is going to get angry. Do we notice a higher frequency? Do we notice that it's distressing to the child how often or how intense their anger feels within them? A lot of times we'll hear children say, I just don't know how to control it, or I just don't know how to express what I'm feeling in this moment, or how to manage these really big emotions that I'm having in a healthy way. And so I think we look a lot at, is it distressing to the child? Is it distressing to the family? Does it limit their ability to function socially, physically in this world, academically? And how can we be there to support them through that process and provide that education and support?
I think one of the things that, I've learned working in pediatric therapy is all emotions are okay and all emotions are good. So, that being said, how can you help a parent who's struggling with a child that might have anxiety or temper tantrums? How can you help them sort of navigate that?
Definitely coaching them to validate the child's feelings, because their feelings are valid and they're real. And I always joke that, a child's going to become naturally very disappointed and upset if they have their favorite ice cream cone and it falls onto the floor and they don't have that anymore.
Wouldn't you?
Absolutely.
Wouldn't we all?
Absolutely. And so it's really validating those experiences and then modeling and teaching them how to work through it appropriately. Like, yeah, I get that. It's very disappointing. And I understand, why you're feeling this way. We certainly can validate the feelings and then teach them the behaviors that are appropriate. So it's certainly okay to be upset. It's not okay to throw the ice cream cone across the room at, mom or dad in the situation. And so there's different ways that we can work through that. Like, oh, I get that. Let's see how we can get our anger out together. Can we stomp our feet a little bit? Some families are okay with that. Some families are not okay with stomping their feet. And so, gosh, can we take some deep breaths together? Let's work through this in this way. And so it's a lot of modeling and guidance, I think.
And Kevin, I think you touched on this a little bit. There is the misconception that my child needs to have a diagnosed mental illness. There needs to be some fancy diagnosis or diagnosis in general for a child to receive therapy. So I think it's important to kind of what are some of the misconceptions around, especially for littles, misconceptions around therapy or what it is or why they would need it. I think a lot of parents, there is a lot of misconception out there, and biased or like I said, like that guilt, shame about a child going through therapy.
Yeah. And I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head with, we have a lot of guilt and shame that often comes across, or that belief that there has to be, like, again, that serious mental health and illness concern. But I think to McKenna's point, that if we are noticing emotional and or behavioral responses that are kind of disproportionate to the situation, that is something that we can definitely help and assist with. A lot of children are dealing with all sorts of different life transitions, especially if we look at like a kindergartner who's starting first grade, or just even moving through the different grade level systems and things like bullying. They encounter a lot of social interactions that they might not feel equipped to handle. And we would call those more of like our adjustment types of disorders. And those are probably some of the most common things that we see, but they don't necessarily present themselves as cleanly or as clearly as like major depression or generalized anxiety. And that's really kind of where we can help provide some insight and guidance that, like, all emotions are good. It's just a matter of what are we doing with them and how are we handling them, as well as to McKenna's point of how can the parents model and support. And I think that's one of those things when parents feel like they're at their wits' end and they've tried all the different things they can do. There's nothing wrong with reaching out to a therapist or a counselor to seek some additional support and guidance. We're not here to judge. We're here to support.
So I think you kind of said earlier, if you think of a typical session, I'm laying on a couch. I'm telling all my hopes and fears to some Freudian, psychiatrist, but that's just not what it is. So what does a therapy session for littles look like?
Yeah, it is very active, first and foremost. We're typically on the floor. We're playing games. We're engaging with toys. Well, we're incorporating that art. We kind of take the lead from the hobbies and interests that our kiddos have, but we also present them with some different options. And depending on what they're working on, we will incorporate the use of games and or art to help work towards those different goals. So if a child is working on frustration tolerance and anger, we have different ways that we can play a game or with toys. And as a counselor, we can kind of manipulate the rules a little bit to see how they respond, to really help work through them of like, wow, I noticed you got really upset when I took an extra turn, and instead of flipping and throwing the game, you said, Mr. Kevin, you took an extra turn. And that's where we would look for that growth, is their ability or to handle not winning in a game and things like that. So we try to look at what the presenting issues and concerns are, what are the treatment goals, and then how do we engage with our interventions? But we're on the floors, we're playing, we're moving about the office space. So it's a very active and engaging session.
I've been in a couple in the therapist's office, and I've seen a lot of therapists use Jenga and Operation, which I would have, you're like, what does Jenga and Operation have to do with kids therapy? So what are some maybe specific tools, specific games that you play and that can also be then transferred into the home environment?
I think you can really make so many different games, toys, books, art materials therapeutic, and you can tailor it to the individual child. I think we have some of our go-tos. I mean, there's so much that you can do with Uno. I joke that I have a job where I get to go and play Uno as much as I possibly want, because there's so much you can do with it, whether that be, okay, every time we play a red card, we're going to talk about or practice a coping strategy when we're feeling angry. Every time we play a green card, we're going to visualize a time when we felt calm and really focus on our five senses and how to really ground ourselves in those moments. And so there's a lot that you can do with them. I think some of the other common tools that we use are the spot books that we love to share with families as well, because you can also access them on YouTube.
So what is it?
The spot books.
The spot books.
Yes, and it incorporates many different feelings and different concepts related to I think mental health and child development in general. But it's something like a little spot of sadness, and it talks about how to shrink your sadness spot when it shows up and why it shows up. There's a little spot of anxiety, anger, frustration, but then they also go into some more abstract and older concepts of a little spot of responsibility, a little spot of kindness and how we can, interact with the world around us in an appropriate way.
How do you take, like if you're using the spot book and using these tools, where do you find your successes? How do you measure these wins for a little?
It's a great question. I think as they're, utilizing the language, as they're practicing the skills, either in session with us or I get so excited, anytime a child comes in and they tell me, Miss McKenna, I, used my my deep breathing strategies when my mom wouldn't get me chocolate cake at the grocery store. And so it's a lot by parent report too, and the child's report, and really what we witness and what we see and how they incorporate these different strategies that we use. And also if we see a decrease in like the frequency, the intensity, and the duration of some of the symptoms that are present. So do we notice that, the child is having less frequent anger outbursts, if you will, or they're better able to manage their anxiety to where it's not so distressing to them and limiting their ability to attend a birthday party. So there's a lot of different ways that we measure it, but I think it's a lot. It can also be very subjective too, which can kind of make tracking that challenging in some ways.
So an interesting, we are in what we'd call the post-pandemic era, right? And a lot of these little kids were born in a pandemic. I mean, you've got kids starting school this year that were born during the height of COVID. So there's been a lot of talk about how the pandemic has affected older people, but with littles, how is that? Have you seen a rise in a need for counseling post-pandemic era?
I would say so. I think probably some of the most common things that we see are a lot of like that anxiety-based issues and concerns, and then a lot of social skills concerns. It's not uncommon when we meet with the family, with our kiddos and caregivers for the first time, that they say they're a pandemic baby, so they grew up with me being present all the time, or being home with mom and or dad, and now they're being asked to go to school and they didn't have some of those atypical like social opportunities, play dates, pre-K, all that stuff. They might not have participated in some of those things. So we do see a lot of anxiety and apprehension, especially as it pertains to the social arena.
So I guess that would lead to my next question. How do communities help support kids and that's our pandemic babies?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think one of the things is, I know like the schools are very well aware of this, so they're working on different ways to incorporate different social engagement and interactions. From a community standpoint, this is where we encourage, like, go to the playground, model these behaviors for your child. It is not uncommon for me to give a therapeutic assignment that includes, even for my littles, that they say hi to a new peer that they come across, whether at the playground, at school, at Target, that if they see someone who's approximately age range that they're in, just to say hi, just to get used to engaging that social exercise of communication, saying hi and recognizing it's okay. If the person doesn't say hi back, the world doesn't end. We just continue about our day. So there are different ways that we try to incorporate that and really encourage like engaging the community through, again, different age appropriate activities that the child is interested in.
I love that. I just think like, even as an adult now, with everything going on in the world, just to say hi to someone in Target who looks like you, or I think that's probably some of the best advice. I'm going to take that advice.
There we go.
So for a kid that might be struggling and the parent has a lot going on and might not notice, sometimes kids spend more time with teachers. What are, if a teacher has some concerns, how best can teachers and other maybe not primary caregivers, if they have concerns, how can they support children in this mental health journey?
I go back to empathy and validation. I think that's so important. And, getting on the child's level, there's something so powerful. We call it co-regulation. A regulated adult is better able to regulate, a child who's having some really big feelings. And I think it goes back to the relationship. It's amazing what we see, not only in therapy, but also in the community, and how children respond when they know that they're with somebody that genuinely cares about them. Children know if they are, not being
They're
well
real. They're
They
real.
are.
Kids are real.
Absolutely. And they'll tell you that too. And so they know exactly what it's like to feel accepted and to feel wanted and to feel safe. And so I think that is so important for teachers, for caregivers, for us as therapists to really appreciate the child for who they are and to let them know that as well in a genuine way.
So one of the things I think is interesting is kids today, it's like they're born and they've got an iPhone or an iPad attached to their ear. They're super technical. So technology is amazing. So how can we embrace technology? What are some more kind of innovative things that are happening, whether it's tools or whatever it is that can really help kids along this journey?
I actually love that question because I have a kid that I work with, and he is on the spectrum, and one of his special interests is watching and narrating different trailers for new movies, and so he'll be the first one to say, like, in December. And it's really, really interesting. And so we're playing to his strengths in that way. And so in this situation, I utilize technology as a way to help build his confidence. I model for him. I narrate, what he's doing. I try to bring emotion awareness into the equation when we're doing that. So there's a lot of great ways that we can use technology. We certainly want to incorporate all different types of play, but I think especially when our world is becoming more and more digitized, if you will, we can find ways to work that into the equation in a healthy way that best supports the child.
And I was just recently made aware of a new law or in Illinois where a requirement about kids for mental health screening. Can you tell me a little bit about that new sort of innovation, which is very exciting?
It is very exciting. And because we're at the cusp of this innovation, we are actively working to learn about this law and how we can best support the initiative as it pertains to mental health checks in the school system. It's brand new, so we are actively working on trying to learn about it because we fully embrace and support that idea, because obviously as counselors, as clinicians for mental health, like, we're really big champions for creating awareness about what is going on in kids' lives. So this is a great new initiative and can't wait to learn more about it.
So for parents who don't know, can you explain the initiative?
I think the best way we can summarize it, and again, we're still learning a lot about what it entails as well. And because it's new, I'm curious to see how it's rolled out and how it's actually implemented. But I think it gives schools the opportunity to help screen for some of those mental health concerns early, especially for some of those children who might not be as vocal about what those concerns are. And so I'm hoping that it allows us to provide interventions and provide a safe space for children to express themselves by doing those mental health screenings, by checking to see if everything is okay or how we can best help them, and then linking them to the resources that are most appropriate. That's essentially how I understand it. But again, that could look different, at different schools.
But again, it comes back to the teacher, the community being involved in our kiddos, right? Mm-hmm. What is one thing that you really wish parents knew about counseling that maybe, whether it's a myth buster or just for example, did you know you play Jenga? Did you know you work with clay? Different tools. What are some things that you really wish parents knew to make them more comfortable with what you do?
Yeah. I think one of the most common things I hear from the kiddos that we work with and the feedback they give parents, because parents often ask their child, how was therapy? What did you do? And that big myth is the child will say, oh, we just played games. I can say with 100% certainty, we are not just playing games. We are
not just playing games.
We are incorporating different interventions. Like McKenna said, we can take a standard game that a child is familiar with, like Uno, and we can create a system to work on coping skills or to process and identify different emotions. So what feels like just play for the child, they are now engaging in a level of vicarious learning where they are learning about coping skills, identifying body cues and triggers to their emotional distress without having to sit and stare at a counselor face-to-face and just talk. Instead, they're getting to do that through art and play. So I think that is probably the most common thing that feedback we get from parents are, what are you actually doing? Because my child says you guys are just playing. Mm-hmm. Again, I can 100% certainty we're doing more than just playing, but we are, again, to that point, play is a child's world, and that's the best way for us to engage them.
And you kind of connected to that, parents who are concerned. I mean, you think of it in a therapeutic session, there's a confidentiality. How does that work with littles? For parents wanting to understand, things are being said or what's being discussed and what's being worked on. Kind of go through that confidentiality portion so parents can understand that process.
I think that's a very good question, because we definitely value parent and caregiver involvement. And going off of those myth busters, and in addition to what Kevin was saying as well, I think the other important component for families to know is the importance of caregivers in the process of therapeutic change. And I think helping them understand the powers of co-regulation and helping them understand their role in this process. But then also, with confidentiality at play, we also want to be mindful and respectful of, what the child shares with us in session. So we usually communicate right off the bat what that looks like in the therapeutic process and throughout the journey itself, how we're going to communicate with families. So we like to loop in the children and let them know, like, I don't have to, disclose to mom that you were very angry with her because she didn't get you these brownies at the grocery store. But I can tell her, I can give her a summary that, hey, we're working through some common triggers to feeling angry and how we can best respond in those ways. And so we give kind of that general summary of a session, so to speak. And then we also, teach the families how we can best support them in those moments of highly intense feelings. And then, of course, with safety, we obviously have to make sure that the child is safe. And so that will disclose more information for.
So to kind of connect that, what do you wish, or what do you kind of want to impart on parents to understand about their child's emotional world?
That all emotions are okay.
I think that's my favorite. Yeah. All emotions are okay. All emotions are okay.
Yes.
Yep.
It's okay to be mad. It's okay to be sad.
Yep.
Feelings get the green light. Behaviors don't always get the green light.
I like that.
Yeah. And I would, really kind of echo that, as a lot of times parents will say, I just want my child to be happy. Mm-hmm. Awesome. However, they're entitled to the full spectrum of emotions, to really highlight all emotions are okay. Not all behaviors are okay. And that's really kind of the emotions sometimes will drive those thoughts, and feelings will kind of drive the behaviors. And that's what we're trying to work through, is to normalize and validate their emotional and physical world, and then help them identify just different ways to respond to those big emotions.
And then a lot of this, going off of what you had said too, is going to be done through play, because play is naturally healing. Play is their world, and that's how they learn. That's how they respond best. And so we are going to be playing Uno in sessions.
What are some, tools? Are there specific maybe books or websites or things that you think parents can? And I just think about the movie Inside Out, Inside Out 1 and 2, and I have never seen anxiety personified so accurately as in that movie. So what are some tools that, and maybe it's the movie Inside Out 1 and 2, but what are some other tools that you want to leave with parents, whether it's books or websites, that can just be a good resource for them?
I will say Inside 1 and 2 are probably most of our favorite movies and go-to to help really drive that idea home that all emotions are okay, because we see that through the main character's eye. Through the main character's eye, we also see that sometimes we need to have some not so good experiences to, one, learn, and also really kind of appreciate those good experiences. So I think a recommendation in general tends to go out about Inside Out 1 and 2. McKenna had mentioned it earlier, but the Little Spot books, it really talks about different emotions and ways to work through them. The materials are also available on YouTube as well, but that's a great resource. I think most of us in our office have the book, the feeling identification diagram, and the little stuffy guys. I know the kiddos love the little stuffy guys and playing with them, and it also kind of helps them identify those emotions.
And then I would also add too that resources in general are the child themselves, and what is their play preference? What do they love? And how can you join your child in play? How can you connect with them? And again, co-regulation and empathy and validation all can be incorporated into that. And so what the child likes and what the child is, geared toward is definitely a strength of theirs. And how can we play off of that too?
So at the end of the day, all emotions are okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, all emotions are okay. And I'm sad to say that this episode is ending, but stay tuned. There will be more in session when we return.